Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Atheist Uprising. I'm your host, Joshua Voigt, and tonight we're going to have a fantastic conversation. We're going to delve into psilocybin and let alone mystical experiences. Does psilocybin allow us to have these mystical experiences and observe something more than what we live in? Or, like in my position, is it more or less just the brain in and of itself having an experience because there's something going on with, let's just say, the substance that one has eaten or edibly taken, and now the brain is going through some sort of how could I say it? Some sort of defense mechanism in order to help it try to understand what's going on. So before we commence, I do want to say thank you to everybody who's inside the comment section at this very moment. Thank you so much for coming on in and watching the show. It means a lot to us in the Atheist Uprising. And at the same exact time, I really do want to thank our Patreon supporters, Linear and TART, for really helping us do what we love doing. And that is creating awesome content for you, the viewer. Now, without further ado, let me bring on our one and only Kafei. How are you doing, Kafei? And welcome to the Atheist Uprising.
Hey,
so
man,
happy to have you again.
Yeah, man, I really appreciate the conversation we had last time. It was pretty cool, man.
Yeah, likewise. And I've read up on it a little more, so I'm a little more, let's just say, I understand the content a little better than what I did when we first had the conversation. And I did check out that psilocybin in and of itself isn't necessarily, and I don't know what's going on with my, there we go, my camera's better. I don't know, 1 second before we commence. I do apologize, but my girlfriend is here and I need to get her inside the house before everything commences. So give me just 1 minute, please and thank you.
I was going to ask you telling stories if you've read Slaughterhouse by Kurt Vonnegut. Maybe you can answer in the chat.
My humble apologies. Okay, I'm back. So, as I was trying to state, I really do think that psilocybin in and of itself kind of helps us breach that barrier. The conscious and the unconscious. And I think with that in and of itself, we can then, how could I say it? We can then start to explore what this means psychologically. But I think for us to say that a mystical experience has been, a person is having a mystical experience is in and of itself a problematic statement, at least in my way of looking at it. But what do you think, Kafei?
I speak about this to a lot of, I guess materialist types, if you want to say. I don't want to necessarily say atheists. Some of them don't identify like, they'll say a solely agnostic or something like that, or non-theist. Right. And they do, upon getting, usually some of the times they're just being introduced to this stuff. And so they'll hear the term mystical experience and they'll automatically assume it's to do with magic or something supernatural in the sense of defying the laws of physics. And there is a confusion there, and I think it's just unfortunate happenstance of our language that the term to identify this phenomenon just so happened to be laid down by William James, and he's the one that popularized this term, mystical experience. And so a lot of the modern neuroscience is based on that specific term. And so, but if you read the literature throughout history that has been written on this phenomenon, others have been speaking about it without the baggage and the language associated with religion, trying to label it without a religious context. Like, for instance, maybe you've heard of Romain Rolland in his letter to Sigmund Freud, attempting to make him aware of this phenomenon. And so he called it the oceanic feeling, so kind of to get rid of the religious baggage. And so it actually appeared in some of Freud's work as a kind of footnote. He tried to say, well, maybe this is the remnant of when we were babies and how we couldn't distinguish ourselves from the rest of the world. And so, when you have this experience as an adult, you're having this phenomenon where you can't distinguish yourself from the rest of the world. And it sounds, but you're having it as an adult as opposed to an infant. And so that was kind of Freud's explanation for it. And of course, you have the work of Carl Jung. He called it the collective unconscious. Abraham Maslow called it peak experience. Pierre de Chardin called it the omega point. These are all terms that don't, borrow from religious language to try to label this phenomenon. And so, yeah, I think it's just, it is kind of unfortunate that mystical experience is the one that took foothold in the neuroscience. But
Right.
yeah, if you look at a lot of the Western research, they do use the term mystical experience. If you go to the UK, where a lot of this research is being done, there's an area, self-referential area of the brain that they refer to, and I'm trying to remember what it's referred to right now, and I can't. I should have wrote this down as notes, but man, I can't remember it. But they use a kind of different language when they speak of it. They try to avoid using mystical experience. Was basically my point. But in the meantime, I'll try to remember it, or maybe I could look it up real quick.
Yeah, sure. No worries. Like, that's the thing, is that I don't mind if an individual wants to bring forth a naturalistic perspective to the mental imagery that is bestowed upon them when they ingest something like psilocybin or any other of the quote unquote magic mushrooms that are out there. So I don't mind that in general. I think the one thing that I would have an issue with, towards a certain extent, if somebody's trying to state that this has something to do with a world that is hidden from our own, in a sense, right? Like a world that shows the true reality of things and not just another experience, just like the experience that we live in our everyday existence, right? I think that if you're stating that there are phenomena that is occurring within the brain that helps us, or not helps us, but that provides an image or provides a perceived perception, for instance, that then one can better know oneself, I don't have a problem with that. But if we are starting to go into an image, let's just say, of some kind of higher consciousness or something towards that extent, that's where I think that's where my problem derives from. Because I don't mind if a person states that they have their own experience, and that is fine. Nobody can take that away from a person. But if we're trying to say that that experience in and of itself is something quote unquote divine or something quote unquote like a cosmic conscience, now I start to wonder where are we really going.
I see what you're saying, and we can get into that. I just recalled what it was. It's the default mode network, and this is a term used in some of the UK studies that refers to. It's basically a referencing ego. So it refers to the areas of the brain of self-reference, where this is me. I'm doing this. I'm making these plans. I'm talking to you. Those areas of the brain and the UK studies that will say the activity is diminished in the default mode network. That doesn't necessarily mean that the activity is diminished overall. It could, because if you look at an fMRI map of a brain in an ordinary state of consciousness versus a height of a psilocybin heroic dose, the activity is almost tenfold versus the ordinary state of consciousness. So obviously there's heightened activity, but in the areas of the brain that refer to self-reference, meaning the areas of the brain associated to what Freud might have called the ego, those areas are diminished. So that's more the language they use it in over there.
Right.
As far as higher consciousness, have you ever Googled brain cell / universe?
Brain cell / universe.
Yeah.
I have not.
Okay. Well, you'll get a very interesting image. If you want, go ahead and do it. And while I speak, I'll try to explain what this image is.
Sure.
It's so what you're looking at is the neuronal structure of a brain cell. Kind of looks like almost like a three-dimensional spider web going in all directions instead of two-dimensional like the spider web, but it's going, it's branching out in all directions. And in the other image, you're looking at clusters of stars contained within galaxies that are essentially make up the same pattern in a fractal sense. So almost as though the implication would be that, the neurons that make up your consciousness in your brain, all the clusters of stars make up some sort of higher consciousness. I'm not saying this is the case,
right?
But this is what the image invokes,
right?
And yeah. So I don't know if you've heard of Aldous Huxley's reducing valve theory.
That I have not.
I would look into that. Because I often say that there's nowhere in neuroscience that has established evidence of where consciousness is generated from. Not even a lot of scientists realize this. That you won't find evidence in neuroscience that consciousness is solely generated by the brain. You could look to Google Scholar to your heart's end, and you won't find a single peer-reviewed paper on it. And so what Aldous Huxley proposed is that at any given moment inside your ordinary state of consciousness, that your mind is actually filtering reality, that there is this onslaught of reality occurring. But obviously, we have the sense of smell, the sense of hearing, the sense, all these different senses. And obviously it arrives at our body as a unity, but our senses break it up. And it's being filtered in such a way that all we get is what he called a mere trickle of what a slice of what we call reality. And so he thought when you take a psychedelic, these filters are removed. And what you see reality as it truly is. That's why he wrote the book. He titled the book "The Doors of Perception," taken from the William Blake quote. If the doors of perception were to be cleansed, then man would see reality as it truly is, infinite. And so that was his notion, and he called it the reducing valve of consciousness. That the ordinary consciousness is being filtered. And there's another name that you could probably search to find stuff on that, and I'll bring it to you in a moment. I don't know if you wanted to comment on any of that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I would kind of agree right now that consciousness in and of itself is definitely something that is kind of up in the air at the moment. And even in neurology, even in psychology and everything like that, there is a certain extent that we know that consciousness, or there are multiple hypotheses of where consciousness could come from. Certain individuals say that consciousness is emergent, an emergent process based on one's environment and circumstance, and also through the ever growing kind of understand when your mind starts to grow, just like how it did when we finally learned the process of fire and cooking, for instance, which helped actually produce the enough energy for the brain to actually grow through obviously a long duration of time, and henceforth allowed us to have higher levels of thinking and higher levels of understanding of the environment around us, and henceforth we can say that consciousness is emergent. That doesn't mean that it gets it from anywhere from an outside conscious domain. It just means that through our own evolutionary standard, or through our own evolution, we were able to slowly but surely, through increments, gain a higher extent of consciousness, or I should say awareness of our surroundings in and of itself. And I think there's a couple of how could I say it, a couple of scientists, definitely neurologists, that would even state that the hypothesis, or the hypothesis would lean a little more over to, or not a little more, but much more into the emergence hypothesis, rather than that there's something out there that is giving us some sort of knowledge in and of itself, or some sort of cognition. And when we take something or ingest, let's just say the heroic dose of psilocybin, then we start to actually see the reality that is around us. I think that what does happen is that psilocybin does kind of break a certain barrier, but I think that barrier is between the unconscious and consciousness. And we can kind of see that when people state that, hey, I'm being dragged through this journey, in a sense. And I think that dragging through this journey is the mechanisms within itself of the subconscious taking control of the consciousness, and kind of dragging it through the information that it has gathered through your entire life. I'm not saying that the consciousness is kind of like an infinite information bureau, but I am stating that the subconscious is still very how can I say it, difficult to pinpoint.
No, definitely. You know, I think that someone wrote anything. You know, there's nothing in on consciousness worth reading right now. Someone made that quote. You know that that and it may be true. The term I was looking for was the mind at large, and if you were gonna Google it, that's probably better than searching for the reducing valve of consciousness.
Okay.
Yeah. And so
okay, I'll definitely do that. Also, I just wanted to see if this was the picture that you were talking about beforehand.
Yeah,
was this the one that you were referencing?
No, maybe I don't know if I could send it to you. If you type in,
yeah, sure. Please hit me up in the private chat, and after I can
brain cells/universe. Let me see if you. I'm gonna do it in a. If you go to image search and you go to brain cells, just type in brain cell space universe, and go to images. And man, let me see it. It isn't popping up for me. Brain maybe. Oh, I put Braille. Sorry, I don't know.
No, it's cool.
my brain cells universe. Yeah, it's one of the first ones that pops up. A brain cell. You can just type in brain cell space universe, and it's like it's like a maroon image versus a kind of like a purple image. It doesn't have a white background.
Right.
And
okay. I think I got it. I think I see it right now. Yeah. Okay. So let me see if I can.
Yeah, if you could put it up, that would be awesome.
Yeah. Okay, no, mine didn't have a white background. Never mind. Dang it. Okay.
Yeah,
No.
it doesn't have a white background. It doesn't have a white background.
Oh, it doesn't have a white background.
Yeah, it's like a kind of a maroon image versus like a kind of a purplish image.
Oh, I think I see it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely hit that up real quick. No, so I think when we're looking at this, because I think human beings have this, and I believe it's called fascism, something along those lines.
Fascism? Or
No, not fascism. It's fascism, which is our recognition of faces, in a sense, our recognition of
isn't that pareidolia?
But there is the fascism is based on understanding and seeing differentiation amongst human beings. That is true. Pareidolia is the one. Thank you. Pareidolia is the one that I'm looking for. Pareidolia is based on looking for patterns and seeing patterns that are significant to what we perceive ourselves. So that's why we can see faces in unusual places and so on and so forth.
Definitely.
I think that even with this, for instance, it's kind of showing the same thing. Well, look at the symmetry between, or the similarity, sorry, not symmetry, the similarity between the neurons of the brain and the universe. They're almost canny to the same, and henceforth there must be some sort of correlation to this. There must be, or maybe even towards the extent of some sort of causation for this. But I just think that correlation doesn't equate to causation, and we need to be a little careful when we are looking at these type of things in order to not assume what they mean. Right, like we need to have information first before assumption.
No, I agree, and a lot of the same could be said with consciousness and the brain. Because the brain, it correlates doesn't necessarily mean it's the cause. Like at the same.
Yeah, absolutely, and you're 100% correct, and I think that's where science is going there. We already have the science of consciousness, and definitely with one of the most expert in the field, Dr. Anil Seth, has definitely took the dive into the science of consciousness. And he believes that consciousness in and of itself is a functional system within a what does he say? Is functional / something system. I forget what it's called. And from there, what he's trying to say is that the brain parts in and of itself actually equate to the workings of the brain and the workings of the mind in and of itself, and making them both kind of correlate together in a sense, which makes
well, there's something I wanted to say about that.
Sure, absolutely.
Because I when you first messaged me to invite me again, man, I was happy to do it because I really liked the conversation we had last time. And when I read the description box, you kind of made it seem almost like a debate fashion of.
Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. I have no issue with that. But I was going to say that. So is this something that, let's say, there is such a thing as a higher consciousness? Are you saying that's something that you would never consider?
I'm saying that when we're looking, and that's a very good question. That's a very good question indeed. I would say that in and of itself, if there is a higher consciousness and it is 100% without a doubt that it exists, then I would think the individual that states that no, there is no such thing as a higher consciousness and turns away from it, even with that much assuredness, would kind of show that person being foolish with stating that. We must go with the evidence and we must go with the flow with where the evidence brings us. However, I'm stating that at this very moment, we are only postulating, in a sense, of this higher or non-higher consciousness. And the way that I'm looking at it is that there's multiple ways that we can look at the hypotheses that are out there that are at least help us try to understand the realm of consciousness, which is there. And for me, I think that if we're really looking at where consciousness comes from, and if we truly do believe, or not believe, but with evidence of evolution, now we must really go into, okay, if evolution is a thing, which it is, then we must really wrap our heads around what is called natural ontology. And I think natural ontology will bring us into the fold of what consciousness and even language and everything like that really holds for humanity in and of itself. But that's the thing, is that that's only comes about because of the factualness of evolution in and of itself and the evidence for it.
Let's see if
if I answered you correctly, that's the thing.
No, I'm listening to what you're saying. I'm seeing how I can address it. I don't know if you had a chance, because I kind of did it kind of late. I should have did it a little earlier, but I offered some links. I don't know if you had a chance to review any of them.
I only saw like a small portion, but I had other things to do, so I couldn't necessarily see the whole thing. So
no problem, man. I know it takes a lot of time. There were some of the lectures given by the neuroscientists involved in these psilocybin studies, and yeah, some of them they go well over an hour long, and it does take some time to listen to. But I think I've told you in the past, I'm pretty obsessed with this, researching this stuff. And so I've heard some of these lectures not twice but thrice, and not only that, man, I've read a lot of the peer-reviewed material related to mystical experience, and in its entirety. And one thing that really isn't discussed, it's more, I brought it up last time. It was at the very end of the show, we got to discuss it. And I don't know if you recall, it was the block universe, Einstein's universe.
Yes. And we did. And I do want to touch on that if you want.
Sure. I guess just to, explain it over once more. Sure. I like that we're doing this over the video, because a lot of times, I usually don't have the advantage of the video, but because I can have the hand gestures out, to try to describe it. And
it's hard when you're typing behind the computer and stuff like that.
Or if it's just audio,
it's very difficult. I agree with you.
It helps with the analogy. So I think I gave the example of if there's a lot of end scenarios of the universe that are considered in astrophysics and amongst physicists, the big freeze, the big crunch, and so forth. Of course, the big freeze is when all entropy reigns and all the stars die out, and you're left with the cold, dark universe. Then there is also the big crunch, where you have kind of the reverse of the Big Bang, and everything retracts back into the singularity. And so, just to give a quick example, I like to use the big crunch because it makes it easier on the screen. So, like you have on this side, you have the Big Bang, and you have the universe plays out. You have the generation of stars, and eventually it all contracts back into the big crunch, or the singularity, and only to what they say the opposite of a black hole is a white hole. It gets through the singularity, it all gets shot out again, and then you have another universe, another Big Bang, and it just goes on and on. So in one of those universes, from the Big Bang to the Big Crunch, you had what Einstein called the block universe. And so I mentioned last time that he didn't believe in free will, that everything is preordained in this model, such that even this conversation, every word that we're saying, every reaction we have, it's all predetermined amongst the timeline. And so from the Big Bang to the Big Crunch, you have this frozen block that you cannot change, that it's immutable, that's so on and so forth. And so I had this, I gave you this idea of this other guy I listened to. His name is Michael Hoffman. One of my friends, Max Freakout, is, you could say one of his disciples, I suppose. Nice. But he expounds a lot of his theories on his podcast, which he goes by Max Freakout, and he's invited me. We've had some discussions, and Michael Hoffman's theory is that at the height of the psychedelic experience, what you transform in, what your consciousness transforms to, is essentially the block. You, in a sense, become the block. And so when you talk about a higher consciousness, like if let's suppose this is true,
okay,
that everything is predetermined, that means that everything that you thought you were doing and thought you were saying and thought you once thought you were the doer, you were the author of your actions. But if you really take this view seriously,
right,
then your actions were never truly yours. They were the actions of the block itself and how it was going to unfold inevitably anyway.
right.
And in this sense, you can kind of speak of a higher consciousness. There is something beyond yourself. And even in the neuroscientific studies, they speak of the noetic quality. I don't know if you got to go into the 6 markers that are definitive for the so-called complete mystical experience. Complete meaning full spectrum, not partial or,
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I think the only part that I actually looked at is predominantly what is the dose you need in order to have that, and what you need in order to be careful of your surroundings once you're in that state, in a sense. That's why you need a setting and a setting.
To prepare for this discussion, I rewatched the last discussion we had, and
Right.
I also got to see your discussion with Scott Williamson afterwards too.
Right.
And I liked it. I was a fan of it, by the way. But I will say that I noticed that you had a misconception, and maybe I was able to articulate myself a little bit better to kind of quell that during our discussion, because I think because you said, "Oh, good point," and I felt like, okay, I think he got it right there. But that when I was speaking of the heroic dose, I had this impression that you were assuming that it was such a powerful dose of psychedelics that it brought you to near death.
Right, but that was the thing, though, is that even myself at that particular time, because I didn't do that much research on it,
Yeah,
I looked at it just like with any other type of drug that would utilize it, and then from there you got to be careful for overdosing and other things like that. But now I understand that is not the case when it comes to psilocybin and mushrooms, and that's why when we were having this conversation, I realized that it's like, okay, there were certain things that I understood or not understood, that I didn't understand when we were talking beforehand. And that's why for me now, I do understand now that, okay, well, psilocybin isn't dangerous.
toxic. Yeah, it's not.
But the one thing that you do need, though, which I did hear a lot within a lot of blogs and a lot of individuals going through the experiences and everything like that, is that you need to have the right set and setting. You need to have the right intention. And that's something that kind of shows me that, okay, already, if you need to have the right intention before you even take the hallucinogen, now that even shows that your brain is already biased, not yours, but the individual who's about to go into that set experience is already biased towards wanting or having something that is higher than themselves. The brain is a very biased, I don't want to say machine, but organism. If it thinks of something long enough, then that very thing, even if it's not true, becomes a truth to it. So that's where I kind of look at it and state, well, if you have the intent of having an experience that is beyond yourself, then most predominantly you will have an experience, because you're not going to focus on the negative aspects of the experience. You're just going to focus when you come out of that experience that, okay, this is the experience that I had.
Right? I would agree to that to a certain extent, because when I think, I could be wrong, I think it was Timothy Leary that coined the set and setting. And yes, he did mean the mindset by the mindset that you go into this experience in, and by setting the environment that you take it in. So you have to have both. In other words, you don't want to be on a rooftop, where you could roll over and
right, exactly.
Yeah, or you don't want to be around a lot of sharp objects. You usually, like, if you were gonna do it, like, let's say you were gonna jump the fence of legality and do it on your own at home, where it's probably not legal in your state. Then you want to be around people you trust and so forth. Yeah, right. Well, at Johns Hopkins, I mentioned that they don't lay them on a cold hospital bed. It's kind of like a living room like setting, and
Exactly.
yeah, and they also take weeks to prepare them. And the preparation is not necessarily catered towards any bias. They could be atheists, they could be agnostic, they could be Christian,
Just
they
like with
could be
Sam
Muslim.
Harris. Sam
Yes.
Harris went through the same exact experience. And when he was relaying that said experience, even he was kind of, how can I say it, blown away from the actual outcome that he
Yeah.
experienced.
Oh, you got to hear that talk.
I
Uh,
did because
it's
you
very
stated
recent.
it. So I
Yeah.
really wanted to delve into it because I too wanted to be as
When did you hear
prepared as
that?
I could.
When did you
Yeah.
come across that?
Yeah.
Uh,
I came across that. I would have to say maybe like 4 days ago or something like that. I
okay,
was like, let
man,
me give
because
it a look.
Sam. So Sam's never tried the heroic dose until recently,
Yeah.
and I think it was
2020.
2020 is when
Yeah.
he finally decided to get around to it, and he always knew about it. He had heard about Terrence McKenna, he had heard about the heroic dose, but
Right.
he just admitted flat out that he was just afraid to do it.
Oh, of
Like he
course.
didn't have the balls yet, I guess.
Exactly. Yes.
And yeah, so 2020 is like, screw it, I'm gonna give it a shot and see how this goes.
Hmm.
And he did say in the midst of that talk, and it's a very interesting one, that if he was a religious person, he probably would have, if he had to grab for religious language to describe it, he would have called it the revelation of the Holy Spirit itself.
Yes. Yes.
And
Exactly.
but nevertheless, yes, he did say he remained atheist. And man, I would love to talk to Sam Harris myself, man.
And likewise.
Yeah, to really nitpick his mind around that, because I believe he is familiar with the perennial philosophy. I remember I mentioned that to you last time.
Yes. Yes. You did.
Yeah, and so I wonder what would be his criticism towards the perennial philosophy, because the way the neuroscientists kind of see it is like, I've mentioned before that I've called into the atheist experience a few
Right.
times. I've spoken to Tracy Harris, Matt Dillahunty, a few of the popular names on there, and I've also spoken to Aaron Raw. I remember Tracy was trying to tell me something like, well, it makes sense because people have similar brains, so they have similar experiences. So, it would make sense that at the height of this experience, everyone is kind of describing it the same way.
Correct.
And I thought that was a good point, and I thought that myself when I first approached this stuff. But my mind's changed when I delved deeper in studying the research. Like, none of the neuroscientists see it like that. They see it now as though it may be some kind of feature of consciousness itself. That it's nothing to do with the particular individual or the brain structure of their material makeup in their body, because as far as we know, we think of ourselves as a species with maybe the most heightened consciousness on the planet. I mean, maybe someone might argue dolphins are smarter, but
Right.
but it could be intrinsic to all life on this planet, from insects to plants to so on and so forth.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the one thing that, because you did mention a lot of things that are in there, definitely when it comes to experience, and everybody has, I wouldn't say the same brain. I wouldn't go that far, but I would say that there are similarities within the
Yeah,
brain when the
similarities.
brain ingests certain things that maybe at a high dose there could be a similar event which happens. right? It's kind of the same as I think with near-death experiences. And I find it very interesting when we delve into hallucinations of other kinds as well, where just like how we discussed prior to, when an individual is lost in the desert, for instance, and hasn't necessarily eaten for a couple of days, one then has a hallucination of seeing an oasis. But as soon as they start heading towards that area, the oasis never seems to arrive. It seems
the mirage.
Exactly, the mirage and everything like that. So in my opinion, and not only just that, but we can go with people who have fasted for a long duration of time and also had called upon religious experiences and so on and so forth. People have died and also called. But there's one thing that always seems to be there, and that is the brain is in duress. That is the one thing that I always want to look at, is that, okay, well, why is it that? Why do these experiences always seem to come from when the brain is at its most vulnerable and at its most weakest?
I would argue that point.
Of course.
Okay, because I've been looking. Well, I first had this. I was actually introduced to Terence McKenna when I was a teenager. And when I heard him, what initially intrigued me was something a little bit more immature and childish, I guess. I would hear him speak about these outlandish visions of almost like I mentioned last time about the parallel realities in M theory, for instance,
Right.
where in your very room there's the universe where dinosaurs never died or Hitler won the war and so on and so forth. And so he would seem to give these types of accounts, very detailed. If you ever heard Terence speak, I mean,
I've heard a couple of his lectures.
Yeah, he's a very articulate guy.
Very.
And he would describe these accounts where it seemed to be when he would take these sort of doses that he was actually piercing into somehow behind the veil of a parallel dimension or parallel universe and seeing like alien archetype. Aztec, Baroque, you know what I mean? Just things that were that bear no semblance to anything of our history, to something that his mind could have conjured in a dream. They just seem to be so far and alien from anything that you could even describe, and so it almost seemed as though he was having some kind of real glimpse into some kind of parallel universe. And so when I heard that, I was like, wow, that sounds interesting. I'm like, I had taken mushrooms in my teens, but I never at that range. Like I took a couple caps or here and there. But when you do that, when you take a low dose, it's very akin to smoking cannabis or something like that. Like it's not very powerful. And so when he mentioned the heroic dose, I'm like, okay, wow, maybe that's what I gotta go for. So it took me years before I finally found someone and like that had the amount to do. And like the guy even told me, he's like, hey man, these people are telling me they're pretty strong. Like, you want 5 dried grams? Like, you're not gonna do these by yourself, are you? I'm like, yeah, that's the instruction I got. I got to do it that way. But it wasn't until I was 23 that I finally got around to it myself. And something even more profound than seeing just what you could call parallel universes. It was almost as though you were seeing every universe at all times and all places. It was something even that more beyond words, more ineffable. And I still hope to this day, even though I do it like every year, I still haven't had the types of visions that Terence was talking about of piercing into a kind of parallel reality. I still haven't had that. It always comes back to what Johns Hopkins describes with the complete mystical experience. And that is one distinction I wanted to get into, if you don't mind,
please.
Is that if you look into these studies, if you read the peer-reviewed material, you'll see that they call them mystical type experiences. And there's a reason for that. They make a distinction there because this phenomenon occurs on a spectrum. And so on the lighter part of the spectrum, you can have experiences that are very unique to the individual. And so let's say you're a devout Christian, you may see Christ on the cross. Or if you're a devout Muslim, you may see Muhammad. Or if you're a devout Hindu, you may see Shiva, so on and so forth.
Right.
They address the individual, but you're still kind of trapped in this subjective experience of experiencing something that's out there, something that's separate from you. You still have this egoic sense of self.
Okay.
Yes. And so I wasn't very religious in my experience when I had this, and I actually had a vision of Bill Hicks, and I saw Bill Hicks, man, and it was
awesome.
It was actually in this back house right here, and I was in the bedroom over there, and I was with my wife at the time, and I saw a vision of Bill Hicks. He said, "Does anyone get the impression the walls are breathing?" And it was at that moment that I would look up at the ceiling, and they were making these intense fractal patterns, just maneuvering themselves around, and they were clear. Like, I have 20/20 vision. They weren't blurry. They were very sharpened. Like, there was nothing blurry about this experience.
Interesting.
And then I was able to sit up at the time, and I was looking at my wife, and I was trying to explain to her what was going on. And when I was looking at her, it was like dusk at the time, and the sun was beating down behind her head, and it was just making her. She appeared like some angelic being, like bright, lightening up to me, and so I was showering her with all these compliments, and she ends off saying, "Well, do you want to have sex?" And at that moment, man, I think because I took the heroic dose, it was finally kicking in, and I couldn't even manage to kiss her, man. I fell to the ground. You probably would have been laughing your ass off at me. I was begging for my life at that moment.
Right.
I truly thought that this was it. I was gonna die. And what ends up happening is that when the neuroscientists talk about the non-dual state of consciousness or the complete mystical experience, it's no longer you no longer have the impression of a subjective self versus an objective experience.
Right.
That is completely dissolved. You no longer have a sense of ego.
Right.
That's all gone. And what seems to replace it, this is what people have a hard time describing. Or it's almost as though language itself wasn't designed to describe something like this. I think Terence said something like that, like the reason DMT can't be described is because it's beyond dimensionality. It's beyond language itself.
Right.
And yet people try to say things about it. Like even in the criteria for the research, one of the markers is this sense of transcending space and time.
Okay.
And so everyone who meets criteria for the complete mystical experience will express something to denote that. So they'll say it seemed beyond dimensionality. It seemed fourth dimensional. It seemed as though all past and all future collapsed into the moment. You'll start hearing descriptions like that because, people are trying to describe what that is.
Right.
And yeah, so that's eventually what happened. And so it intrigued the hell out of me. I eventually came down. I was able to sit up. As I was coming down, you kind of have the reverse of the height, and you're coming down. So I had again with the Johns Hopkins professional, it's called the archetypal / visionary experiences versus what they call the complete mystical experience. Right. So when I was coming down, instead of Bill Hicks this time, I had a vision of Terence McKenna saying, "Did you see it?" And he even balled up his hand like that. "Did you see it?" And so at that point, I was sitting up, and I could, I was back into my material body. I was glad to hell to be back.
Right.
Because if I had, but I still had some lingering sense of what just happened. And I was telling myself, it was such a powerful experience that if this didn't wear off completely, that I would be liable to suicide. It seemed like the only way out. Like I would have like that was the only option, was to commit suicide. And I think it's because I was kind of unprepared. I didn't know about this experience. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I just heard Terrence McKenna say this wild talk. I'm like, hey, that intrigues me. Let me try this out.
Right.
You know? So after I had that, I went and I realized that, I was never really at near death, because, you research it, you realize it's not that very toxic. Exactly. That 500 grams is well far away from 3 pounds, which you would really have to take to get a fatal dose. And so after that, I spent a year dwelling on it. And by next year, I wanted to try it again. But this time, I didn't have that same reaction of like, oh my God, I'm fearful for my life. And I think that's what religion is. I think the Hindus and, all that preparation is so that when they finally approach that experience, they don't have to greet it with fear. It's more of an acceptance. And so when, William James speaks of the noetic quality, he does say that, it has some kind of authority, where of course your ego is going to die into it. So obviously you have to give yourself up. You have to surrender to it. Right. And so I think that's why people have this sense of a so-called higher mind. Michael Hoffman brought it as far as bringing it to the block universe. But I really think that, maybe we don't know exactly what it is. Maybe there's Hindu yogis that can enter this state naturally many years ago. The first criticism I wanted to make about you said that it always seems like people enter it in some kind of stress. Right. Yeah. And so that I wanted to address that. I don't know if you ever heard of Alan Watts talk about the natural satori.
Interesting.
Ramana Krishna, he's a famous yogi that he said when he was about, I think he was 6 years old, he was just standing there, and he was watching swans fly over a hill. And in the midst of just standing there and watching that, he fell into a mystical experience. So I don't think you have to necessarily be under intense stress to have it. Even Siddhartha Gautama, I don't know if you've read the story of Buddha.
When I was younger, when I was in my Buddhist phase, now I'm not going to lie, I need to reread on it. I only know just
I'll go into it very quickly. If you look into, he was a prince to a king. Right. And in the story, the king keeps him away from death. He doesn't allow him to see graveyards. He doesn't allow him to see any types of sickness and death. He keeps him away from all that. In the story of Buddha, and eventually, he starts to catch on, and he becomes very obsessed with what the yogis are doing. Remember, Buddhism is not around yet. He's the original Buddha. Exactly. So this is dated around 500 BC, approximately. And so he becomes very interested in the yogis practicing asceticism. Asceticism, and the forms that they practice it was extreme fasting, to the point where they look almost like beyond anorexic. You can see their skeleton, and they would that would be pushing yourself to the edge of death through fasting. And so they were trying to get this enlightenment, or what they called samadhi at the time, what Buddhism would later on call nirvana, by doing that. And so Gautama, under the Bodhi tree, finally achieved it. And what he realized was that all that asceticism was unnecessary. All that was needed the entire time was merely to relinquish the ego. And I don't know if you meditate. I practice Advaita Vedanta, but it involves the cessation of thoughts. And that may sound easier said than done. Maybe you could do it for a few seconds at a time, but the point is to prolong this, to prolong a clear state of mind that is devoid of thought. And when you try to do this, you're going to find that your thoughts enter your mind like hiccups. There is almost no way of keeping them, away. I've heard a common analogy that's brought up in discussions like this is the pond of water. The pond of water, the ripples on the pond represent your thoughts. Okay. And when in a state of meditation, the goal is to have that pond remain completely still. But if you're trying to stop thinking, that's very akin to using a flat iron and trying to iron out the ripples. You're only going to create more ripples by doing that. And so, if you can cause the pond to be still, then maybe, that's where the mystical experience can happen naturally and without any stress involved. And so, like, why doesn't it occur so often today? Amy asked this, Amy Newman, I don't know if you watch her channel, but this question came up. And I there's certain things I think, obviously in our culture today, we're very dried up of spirituality. You don't go to church, and you don't go to a Christian church to meditate. You mostly sing, and there's a kind of like a socializing involved. But if you look into early Christianity, they were monastic. They were monks. They practiced like things like quietism or hesychism. Hesychism.
It's called hesychism.
Hesychism. I don't know if you've heard of hesychism, but that's
where it's
kind of like a contemplative practice.
Yeah.
Yes. And so, that's one scenario. So you have the drying up of spiritual disciplines.
Okay.
Another thing is, and this might sound more Illuminati-esque.
Okay.
But you've heard about the fluoride in water.
Yes.
Okay. So the natural source of your supposed endogenous psychedelics is DMT, dimethyltryptamine. Your own brain makes it, and it's elaborated in the pineal gland.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have fluoride, which calcifies the pineal gland, and it slowly destroys it. I've heard theories. I've never confirmed this, but I thought it was interesting. I've heard that at one point, like I mentioned once, that Hinduism holds roots 10,000 BC. It's a long time ago. And some people speculate that the pineal gland at one point was the size of a walnut. So we had very enlarged pineal glands. So it would make sense that this experience was quite happening more frequently, more naturally, as a comparison to now, where it's the size of a pea. And, so we have the pineal gland, it's bombarded by chemicals that in everything we eat. It's not just the fluoride in the water, it's the aspartame in gum, the mercury in cans. You can go on and on. There's a lot. You can almost say that there's some kind of conspiracy to spiritually suppress human beings.
Well, I wouldn't go that far.
Yeah. If you took it to its extreme, that's why I said it kind of sounded Illuminati-esque.
I think the major, because what spirituality was beforehand was a sense to try to find out, first off, what was out there, first off, but without any of our scientific endeavors or anything like that. The most scientific city that there was at the time was Babylon and everything like that. And we can only go back to Babylon some 2000 BCE or something along those lines. So Babylon being its own city in a sense, with science and everything like that, let alone the science was mixed with mysticism and the rest of it. So there was a lot of things that didn't necessarily, how can I say it? Even though that they were the fathers, let's just say, of science, or the founders of science, the true founders were those from the Greco-Roman periods, because they were the ones that tried to push away the mysticism and look at the situation at hand. And I think that in and of itself is something that really started to slow down the emphasis of mystical experiences, because people were like, hey, we don't need this in order to understand our environment.
Maybe you haven't heard of the Eleusinian mysteries.
I have, actually. I have, but those were only utilized of the highest individuals that were able to afford to go into.
And the most notable philosophers of the time.
Indeed, but there was also other philosophers that wanted to stay away from these, I guess you could say, institutes in a sense, and just look at it through naturalistic lenses. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that they didn't use what individuals from this school of thought found out, but they were looking at it through a more naturalistic lens.
Are you familiar with the Kykeon? It's
The Kaikion sounds familiar, but
yeah, it's Kykeon, and it's almost like a vessel, and it was associated with the Eleusinian mysteries. And the idea behind the Eleusinian mysteries is that, you know, some of the most notable philosophers from Plato to Plotinus probably partook in this beverage. And you know, a lot of historians, they don't know what it was. They know barley was involved. They know, you know, certain things were involved. There's theories, though, that it may have been some kind of infected ergot, which is a precursor of LSD. It's
right.
LSA. So it's very possible that the whole force behind the Eleusinian mysteries was, you know, based on taking these psychedelics.
Right. Which makes sense, which definitely makes sense. I'm not stating that psychedelics weren't involved in these type of, let's just say, in philosophical circles. That is the farthest thing that I'm trying to say. However, I am also stating that there are certain philosophers, such as, let's just say, Democritus, for instance, or whatever, that did not partake in these type of.
No, there is certain atheist philosophers that stayed away from this. I really like Plotinus. He was one of the last Greek philosophers. I don't really think he had some major predecessor after him. Maybe Hypatia, but she was female. But she a lot of her work was based on, you know, the giants that stood before her.
Absolutely.
Plotinus, you know, he called. There was a recognition of mysticism within, you know, within the Greek philosophers. They called it henosis. They, of course, you know, this term mystical experience didn't, even though the mystical experience is based on Greek, it's mystikos in Greek.
Right.
You know, so if you look at henosis, it is a sort of contemplative practice. So it's hard to say whether they're using a psychedelic or they had a natural method to achieve it. But henosis did offer a glimpse into what Plotinus called the one. The one being, I tried to mention it last time with Brahmin and Hinduism, like this all-encompassing, containing all permutations, every possibility, almost like the block universe metaphor, you know. So a lot of the work now in the neuroscience, I don't know if you looked into it. Like when I mentioned the perennial fossily last time, it's not something that it's necessarily part of my own personal bailiwick. It's something that's addressed by the modern scientific studies. Like when they dose the volunteers with a high dose, and they see that their experience seems to be expressed in such a way that it seems indistinguishable from what mystics throughout the ages have been describing in all the world's major religions. You know, even religions that no longer are among us right now, like Manichaeism or the Egyptian religion,
Absolutely.
so on and so forth. You know, the shamanic religions, they invoke the perennial philosophy because they see it as like the perennial meaning like undying, that it's you know, recurring, like these recurring truths come about time and time again. These truths that are unbounded by culture or the religion they come from, they transcend. Fritz John Schuoff, he was a perennialist, and he called it the unity, the transcendent unity of religion. That, you know, they also call it the common core. You know, that there's a common universality phenomenon that's occurring throughout time, and it seems to be at the basis of all the major religions.
Absolutely, but I think the one thing, because I've also looked at psychiatrists who also give their subjects, let's just say, the heroic dose as well. And as you stated, they put them inside this sort of like, well, not lounge, but like lodge-esque type environment. They tell the individual to have they prepare them for this event and everything like that. And the thing that I hear constantly from certain psychiatrists that I've listened to, at least, is that they don't want the individual, or they don't want to tell the individual that this is a mystical experience. They allow the individual to explain what the situation is. And there are some that state that if they are more religious, they say that it is a mystical experience, that they found this sense of unity and everything like that, and they found that they were above time and space and all things kind of wrapping into one entity. And then when you hear individuals that don't necessarily believe in a deity, for instance, they look at it through other means, in a sense, just like, again, like Sam Harris and a couple of other individuals that looked at it as feeling like, well, they're feeling absolute love, for instance, or feeling absolute joy and other things like that. And I think that because there are these distinctions between the states of taking the heroic doses, we can slowly but surely start to see that, okay, maybe it's not as unific as individuals want to claim it to be. Like, I think, and just like how Sam Harris stated, he stated that if he was religious, he would have brought forth that thought process of, okay, I'm being dragged through this experience by the divine in a sense, or by a divine wind or something towards that extent. But the thing is that him being an atheist and him also being a neurologist, even though that he was blown away by the experience in and of itself, he stated multiple times it was just like how you stated, it was a terrifying experience. He stated that not everybody should be doing it because it can disassociate an individual with reality, in a sense. So that's the whole entire point, is that we need to look at the fullness of the experience itself. And that's why I like philosophy, for instance, or delving into philosophy right now, because they talk about what is called verticality of a religious or mystical experience. So what is the verticality of that experience? And can we say that that experience is from something other than ourselves, or is it just ourselves delving into, as I stated, the unconscious or the subconscious and consciousness? And from there, because that breach happens between the two, let's just say, consciousnesses, what we have a tendency of seeing is that certain other areas within the brain light up than other areas. And if that is the case, then that's why I think that psychiatrists are right with people who are highly depressive. If individuals who are highly aggressive, or whatever the situation may be, take this substance at a higher dose, and that can actually change your life to be a more docile person, in a sense, a more lovable individual and everything like that, I agree. But if we're going to start to say that there is some sort of connection with, let's just say, a block universe-esque type thing, I would have to think about that and do much more research on it in order to really come to some sort of drastic conclusion such as that. I'm not saying that the conclusion is drastic. I did say that. But what I am just saying is that how do we look at this without assuming? That's the huge thing.
I would ask, I want to address what you said, man, but I just as a kind of joke, I would say, would your research involve heroic doses?
Yes. Yes. Okay. My research involved heroic doses, and that was the thing, the heroic doses in and of themselves. And one thing that I also checked out is that after individuals went through the heroic dose a couple of times, the thing is that after a while they realized, and that was the one thing that I assumed beforehand, but there was actual evidence for it, was that after a while they did not have the same experience. The experiences were actually wearing down because the brain was starting to build some sort of what is called a defense against these type of hallucinogens in a sense, or the defense with the things being ingested. So what ends up happening is that people start taking that plus something else. So take this plus acid, take this plus weed, take this plus whatever.
Plus DMT.
Plus DMT, exactly, right? So in the end, I think what we're really looking at here is that the drug brings you through an experience, and that experience is real for the person and also for the people who are going through it. I'm not saying that those experiences aren't real to them. But again, we need to look at the verticality of, is this something outside of ourselves, or is this actually something that is produced within ourselves? And if it's produced within ourselves, then we don't need to look and state that, okay, well, this is from something that is beyond our capabilities and beyond our scope of thought process.
Yeah.
All it just is that it's within an area that we can hopefully at one time really can focus on and really can delve into in the end through science.
I mean, I don't want to diminish the block. I love the way Alan Watts described it. He said, you know, what it does for the individual, you know, the mystical experience is make them realize that, you know, because if it is solely something inside yourself, then you have at its extreme some kind of solipsism, at its lowest some kind of, you know, like, oh, okay, well, maybe sufficient explanation for yourself. But he was trying to say that, you know, that there is a unity between you and the rest of the world. You know, so the mystical experience is something that without it, he would say you have an intellectual handicap. You know, like the reason why we engage in war and all that today is because we have this impression that you're separate from me, I'm separate from you. And you know, religion, I don't know if you've ever heard this interpretation of original sin, you know, not that you're born with some kind of original baggage, but rather the original sin is this perception that you're separate from all else. So if you perceive yourself separately from all else, then that gives you a leg up to, oh, I can steal from this person, I can kill this person, I can rape this person. But if you see them as yourself, then that's not going to occur. You have this universal brotherhood, love, harmony, and so forth. You know, so you have the golden rule, the basis of religious morality. And I did want to bring up some other points, like, you know, because I talk about this a lot with a lot of people who identify with atheists or materialists. And, you know, they'll say, well, you know, that sense that you get of transcending time and space, well, that's because you're bombarding your kinesthesia, your proprioception, your body, your mind's ability to assess where you are in space and time is being bombarded. So now you feel like you're everywhere, you know? But I don't know. I think that's, I can't really, that when I hear that criticism, I kind of feel it comes from someone who's never had the experience for themselves, because it doesn't feel like some kind of bombardment, or like you said, it's very real to the person. It's more real than reality itself, and some people describe it. You know, another thing I wanted to add was,
but if you, I don't want to cut you off or anything.
No, go ahead.
But it's just that because we want to get ready for the after party and stuff like that, and I do want to give us a bit of time just to kind of, if we want to get drinks, if we want to get whatever.
I'll probably go get something that.
Exactly. Because again, my number one thing isn't to try to dissuade individuals from trying to heroic dose or trying psilocybin on their own. That is not what I'm trying to do at all. I think that if it does make people better, why not?
Yeah.
But for me, the thing that I have a feeling is that when we look at human history, human history in and of itself. Actually, you know what? Before I even delve into that, let's take the break now, and then after we can delve into it afterwards.
Yeah, if you want to, I would love for you to finish that thought, unless you want to just cut it off right there.
Okay. Because that's the thing. Because if I finish my thought, then after I want you to rebuttal, because I'm fair like that, and after we're just going to continue.
I don't mind waiting. Go for it, man.
Okay,
I don't mind waiting.
Yeah, okay, perfect. So the thing that I was going to say is that if we look throughout history, we know that human beings have always had access to these mushrooms. We know this from all the way from prehistory,
millennia. Yes.
But the thing is that in and of itself, and even if we look at certain other theories that have come out from, let's just say the psilocybin and other magic mushrooms, for instance, I would state that it was it was very impressionable on ourselves as human beings. Now, the one thing is that never really changed the way that we acted to each other, and never actually changed our aggressive patterns, our ways of looking at each other as the other, or anything like that. And for me, I think that because this is a revolution which is happening right now, what they call the hallucinogenic revolution, I would look at our psychedelic revolution. My apologies.
Psychedelic renaissance.
The psychedelic renaissance. Thank you. Psychedelic renaissance. But because of that, I have a feeling that people don't necessarily look at history and really see the realities that actually occurred. And let's just say with the Vikings, for instance, that utilize these types of substances to go on to absolute rampages against other people and everything like that, utilizing the same exact things that we're talking about that enlightens everybody supposedly, but yet the Vikings themselves crushed their enemies with the same exact substance. And that's the thing that I'm looking at here. And let alone, we know that warriors took substances like that as well and hunted down their foe to almost near extinction. And I think that when we really look at this, and when we come back from the break, I would say that we should delve into this more. And if anybody wants to actually come into the actual after party, that would be great too. I would love to hear your opinion on the matter as well.
Yeah, I won't be long. But I have looked into that, and even the Mayans, committed human sacrifices, even though they had huge reverence towards the mushrooms too. And there has been scholars that have been trying to, explain that somehow. I don't know if you ever looked into the Jains. The Jains are very interesting. I'll just end it there.
Yes, the Jains are very interesting. But I want you to explain it too, because for me, it's only limited knowledge. So I'm not going to try to be like I'm some sort of. I know. So please,
they were naked ascetics. They seem to have this phenomenon, kind of like lead their whole culture at every step of the way, and so. They wouldn't even hurt insects. They would act like they couldn't even intentionally step on a bug. They wouldn't even harvest potatoes in fear of harming insects.
Yes,
they had a huge reverence for life, and
indeed.
So if you're guided truly by that, I know some tribes use psilocybin for hunting, but they didn't use the heroic dose. You couldn't hunt on a heroic dose.
No, that is
walk on a heroic dose. So that's another point to make.
Absolutely. So I think we should get back to that. How long do you think would be good for you, in a sense, to get
man, I'm like 5 minutes away from my store. My vape ran out. I was gonna get another one.
Sure. Take 5 minutes. Take 10 actually. Let's take 10, and after we'll come back. I'll send you the link for the after party, and we can continue this conversation.
Awesome, man. Appreciate it, dude. I loved it, man. Thank you.
No, absolutely. I loved it as well. Because that's the thing. I've learned more about this subject than beforehand, because I was biased. And now really looking at the subject matter as it is, I realized that there was more for me to learn about than just thinking that it's just some horrible thing.
You got to come over one day, and I'll dose you, man.
Sounds like a plan. All right.
right.
Have a good one,
See ya,
and I
man.
will see you in 10.
All right. See ya.
All right. And everybody, I will send you the link to the actual after party. So if you want to wait there, that would be fantastic. So we can really delve into it and we can get going. And if you want to join us for this awesome conversation, please do. I'm ecstatic. I love to have these conversations. And if you think that I'm wrong based on what I'm thinking, jump on in. Be like, Josh, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. And I'll be 100% wanting to hear your position on it. Here's the link right here. Please click on that, and that will bring you to the after party. As for now, I want to thank everybody so far who has come in and watched what we have done. And if you want to join our after party, as I stated, just let me know. I'll hit you up with the link to invite, and you can just come on in, and we'll have a fantastic conversation continuing with that. As of now, everybody have a good break. Have a great one. Man, let me end actually.